Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining Monster's webinar today on Think Outside the Checkbox, leveraging your brand to attract diverse talent. So finding the right candidate that ticks all the boxes has never been an easy feat for even the most talented of recruiters. Companies are now also facing increased workforce scrutiny on their record of diversity hires and leadership makeup. It's easy to see why recruiters are struggling to find candidates that fit the right skill set and curate a diverse and inclusive workforce, all while staying within the boundaries of time and, of course, costs to fill. So to succeed, companies have had to adjust their recruiting and hiring strategies to fit this new environment. So I'd like to welcome you all today to this session. I'm your host. My name is Meg Goulet, and I am the Marketing Director for Monster Worldwide. We have a great agenda lined up for you today. We're going to be kicking things off with a keynote presentation that we're going to have before moving into our panel discussion. Our keynotes go through some key statistics that we found through all of our great research that Monster has been doing over the last year or so. Then we'll move into our industry experts. The panel will then explore things like how to conduct a brand audit, where to promote your company's diversity and inclusion strategies, as well as tips for unbiased recruitment writing. I know that's all very top of mind for you as well. Again, feel free to submit your questions throughout the webinar. You can use that Q&A button at the bottom of your toolbar, or again, chat us at any point in time. Again, here's a review of our agenda for today. So there is a lot that can be said about 2020, especially as it relates to diversity and inclusion, but putting politics and protests aside, the best way that we can really describe the year was a necessary disruption. When we took a step back from business as usual, we saw what was really right in front of us the entire time, right? Something that really hasn't gotten the attention that it deserves. And something that Ruhal Dooley said, he's an HR advisor at SHRM, said that employers can't deny now what they're seeing and what their employees are forcing them to pay attention to. The last year really forced companies to take a look internally at their hiring practices. Over 1/3 of employers globally reported that they do not have a diversity and inclusion strategy. Not sure if some of you are coming in today or feeling the same way, but we really hope there's a way that you can benefit from this webinar, and hopefully we can boost those numbers globally too. Employees and candidates are taking notice. More than half of them don't actually believe that their company successfully created diversity in 2020. So it's time to plan for change. Just like how, as Mark Morial, who is the president and CEO of National Urban League, pointed out, 10 or 20 years ago, the same organizations were looking at how technology was going to transform business, right? He's talking, of course, more broadly than tech. He's talking about digital transformation. It's really, if you think about it, it's a foundational change in how an organization delivers value to its customers. And that's really what we're thinking about here for diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's a foundational change. You know, of course, there are many reasons to hire and to retain diverse candidates. In a report by McKinsey, organizations in the top quartile for gender diversity on executive teams were 25% more likely to have above average profitability than companies in the fourth quartile. For ethnic and cultural diversity, top quartile companies were 36% more profitable. So if you're at an organization where you're still having conversations about the importance of diversity, equity, and inclusion, why this should be a strategy within your company, look at stats like this. Do some research. There's a lot of great information out there. It's something that needs to be brought to the light here. And of course, like when we dig deeper into diversity and inclusion, when we think about what diversity really look at here, we're looking at things like age, women, gender identity, race, and even physical disability too, right? When we think about this in terms of diversity hiring, what it really means is that you are making an effort as an organization to ensure that underrepresented groups are given access to the same opportunities as others. So you here have some reasons why these groups have struggled, right? I'm just going to call out a few here. Of course, you'll be able to read the stats on the slide. It's also worth pointing out that we'll be sharing a copy of this exact deck as well as the recording tomorrow too. So if you feel that I'm going too fast through some of these statistics, definitely take a look in your email tomorrow and you will receive this. So here, women, 58% of female candidates say that they're being paid fairly compared to 70% of male candidates. 61% of people of color said the level of diversity at their company affects their ability to succeed. Isn't that crazy? To be able to succeed at your job. That's what not being an inclusive environment can do to candidates and to employees. That's where you lose people, right? So it shouldn't come as a surprise that changes are already underway. Perfect example is us having a conversation about this today. We're seeing that 45% of employers have updated or are working to update their recruitment strategies to attract more diverse talent. We're thrilled that you've joined us for this webinar. We hope that you're part of this 45%. And again, you can help this number grow together. We've found that they're primarily focusing on employee training at 42%, gender pay equality at 40%, and 34% in terms of building a diverse workforce. So there's a lot to be done, but this seems to be where employers are primarily focusing their efforts. Now let's look at what employees want, right? There are two signs, where employees are prioritizing. We're looking at an inclusive work environment in the workspaces, having people from diverse backgrounds in leadership positions, and encouraging employee resource groups. This is really an opportunity for what we saw from that last slide in terms of the priorities for employers, as well as what employees want. This is an opportunity. If this is what employees are looking for, this is where you should also focus in terms of your energies, especially internally with retaining, right? Encouraging employee resource groups to make sure that people feel like once they have been brought to your company, once they have started working there, if they are valued talent, you don't want them to leave. You don't want them to go to a competitor, to another company. More importantly, you want them to have a great experience from start to finish at your organization, and encouraging those employee resource groups, places that they can share, can talk, have a safe place, trust, all of that's really important. So while they don't entirely line up, it's still a step in the right direction. 45% of candidates expect to learn about a company's diversity and inclusion efforts during the recruitment process. So we're going to be talking a lot about employer branding today. That doesn't just happen, when you're in the final stages. That happens all throughout the recruitment process. From the first impression of your brand, that's really where it starts. And they expect to learn about that. So make sure that you're communicating and meeting those expectations along the way. It's critical for companies to communicate this, as I said, throughout the entire process. More than 4 in 5, 86% of candidates globally say that diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workplace is important to them. 86%. 62% of people, love this stat, couldn't believe it, would go as far as turning down a job offer if it came from a culture that didn't support diverse workforce. Think about that. 62% would say no. They would turn down a job if it didn't have a diverse workforce. Again, it's listening to those companies, those employee resource groups, understanding what your candidates want, and that's where you get to attract as well as retain that talent. Most importantly, 70% of employees expect them to be transparent about diversity in their workforce. We can talk a lot about whether or not you share it now or later. Progress is progress. Employees are expecting for companies to be transparent. Even if you haven't made the full step there yet, talk about the efforts that you're making. Employees will be proud. They will be referring other candidates to you. You have to talk about where you are as well as where you would like to go as an organization. So let's talk about how companies can communicate that transparency a little bit more. It's this idea of recognizing individuality of your employer branding. I love this quote: great workers are artists. They're not cogs. And so you have the realization that individuals should be individuals and people are not cogs and machines. And that is where your employer brand lives, is understanding not the parts of the whole, but the individuals that make up this process. So, EVP, many of you are probably very familiar with this, but it's worth revisiting the definition anyway. So, what is an EVP? So, EVP can stand for employer value proposition, employee value proposition. I've heard both ways, but really what it comes down to is your EVP is your promise. It's as an employer, what will you give to your employees in return for their time, their loyalty, their productivity? So it's often seen as like a bold and compelling, but really genuine and authentic statement that defines you as an organization. So if you think about it, it acts as like a filter as well as a magnet, getting the right people to apply for your jobs. EVP is in the entire candidate journey. So it's there in your website, internal communications, your job descriptions, your interview process, onboarding. Again, as we're talking about it, it's the whole process from start to finish. You'll see it through copy, imagery, company events. So really having that genuine statement, that promise that you're going to make, that needs to be seen throughout the entire candidate journey. So as you're reevaluating this, right, think about employee benefits. So not just healthcare, or dental or team lunches, right? Or quarterly activities, but like compensation, dog-friendly workplaces. What is it that you're going to give them, especially now as we're talking about mental health? Are you giving them, half-day Fridays or personal days? How are you as an organization going to value and demonstrate the benefits beyond just what you would expect? Culture. What is your company culture? There you work hard, play hard, you casual and laid back. Do you have an emphasis on teamwork and collaboration? Is it the focus on customers or sales? So all of this goes into the company culture and how you build your company. And then, of course, personas, your ideal persona. So what type of person are you trying to attract? Who is your ideal candidate? It could be semi-retired people, stay-at-home moms who want to work part-time, former plumbers, et cetera. It can be just figure out who your ideal candidate is, and that's where you're going to try to find the fit. So when we're thinking beyond just your EVP, right? Think of it in terms of broadly just your employer brand. So you might already have an EVP. You might still be working on your EVP. Where it starts is really defining that story and then going beyond that. So sharing your story through job ads or your career site or company profile pages, turning up the volume, making sure that you're getting your brand, your message, your values out there through, targeted media campaigns or social media as well, getting the word out there. And of course, finally, convincing, converting, managing through, the talent community, resume feeds. So again, trying to find the full circle of your employer brand. Again, if your EVP is really part of your employer brand, it goes beyond just the recruitment process. As Ruhal Dooley, again, I'm going to quote him, says, for diversity to mean anything, it needs to be grouped with inclusion and equity. At Monster, we had to take a look at the same approach to make DEI core to our organization. So our own CEO, Scott Gutz, said, if our vision of the future is to make every workplace happier and more productive, it must start with changing our culture here at Monster. So I'm not going to go into everything that we did. I'm not saying that this is the right way to do it. And I will say there's still a long way to go. But Monster has been able to develop a diversity steering committee, taking some of the people in the most underrepresented groups, making sure they have a voice and heard from. We created new employee resource groups, such as Women at Monster and Pride. We launched 2 conscious inclusion e-learning modules that all Monster employees had to take. We continuously run surveys to just evaluate the makeup of our company, identify gaps, and where we can improve. We had leaders compile a list of pledges on how they will make their teams more equitable, diverse, and inclusive. And there are already quarterly goals and check-ins. And then finally, we revamped our own hiring process. It's something that needs to be done all the time, but we took another closer look at it, from working with the more diverse slate of candidates to the actual interview process itself, to really helping hiring managers just understand their unconscious biases. And that's something we'll talk about too, is that unconscious bias that sometimes can really guide that interview in a way that you didn't expect it to. So again, what I've said is that what we've done at Monster is just to start, and we'll be the first to admit that there's a lot more to be done, but we'll leave you with this. So after you leave this webinar and you revisit your employer brand through the lens of DEI, please ask yourself this question: where do you hope to go as a company, and what are you going to do to get there? So with that, I'm going to be introducing our panelists. So again, there was a lot of data in that keynote that I just shared with you. I will be sending around the PDF if you want to take a closer look tomorrow. But I'm really excited to share introduce our expert panelists here today. We have Katrina Kibben. They are the Chief Executive Officer and founder of 3 Ears Media. We also have Ted Kinney. He's the Vice President of Research and Development at PSI Services. And Fanta Selman, one of Monster's own. She is the Senior Manager in Strategic Planning of Employer Brand. Whoa, felt Fanta so much. So she is joining us as well today. So I've already seen some questions come in. Please continue to do so. But at this point in time, what we're going to do is start going through some of the great questions that we've already seen submitted in advance and really start digging into this. So let's start with Katrina. I'm going to put you on the spot here. What questions should you ask in the hiring manage intake to really understand what managers are looking for, and how can you address bias in that conversation?
Absolutely. And I feel like that's almost a 2-part question, because the majority of what we do at 3 Ears Media is writing great job postings. And so I always tell people the difference between good and great is accuracy, right? It's actually knowing and being able to imagine the person on the other side. And that means asking questions that prompt stories instead of lists. So traditionally, a recruiter will ask a question like, tell me the skills you're looking for. And when you ask for that, you know what you'll get? A list of skills. Instead, you can ask questions like, what have they done to prepare them for this role? And we start to get these stories. We start to imagine the person on the other side. And with that intel, we're actually able to have something that's more accurate and true, because often the bias comes in because we add lies, right? So, and I won't go on my soapbox, but I just completed a 100-year research study of job postings to understand if our actual tactics have influence on bias, not just the words we use. There's a lot of technology in the HR space that will tell you this is a boy word and this is a girl word, but they don't actually tell you if you've created bias through your tactical approach. Example, having 50 bullets. The reason those bullets are there is because you have too many requirements and you're trying to build barriers instead of access. And that's where bias comes from. It comes from years of experience you picked out of a hat, college degree requirements that aren't real, and a bunch of other elements that, frankly, we just haven't been taught.
That's great. Now, Ted, do you have anything to add to this as well?
Yeah. I was feverishly writing down some notes while Katrina was talking, and I agree with so many of those points. I think, in particular, when you think about the way that job requirements are often defined in terms of educational requirements, I think is a prime example. And Katrina and I have spoken about this a little bit in the past too. That there's sort of this understanding out there in recruitment that you have to have these degree requirements, and these education requirements almost sort of serve as a proxy for a person's ability level. And the reality is, as an IO psychologist who studies selection procedures and what predicts job performance in the recruitment process, these education and skill requirements tend to explain the least amount of variance in job performance down the road. So we get asked all the time about skills tests. you can put in place a skills test, but the amount of variance in job performance that a skills test will explain is much lower than other types of selection procedures. Education and GPA and that sort of thing is probably the worst predictor because there's not much correlation between somebody's education level or their grade point average and their job-related knowledges, skills, and abilities, right? And so I think to Katrina's point, there's so many times that we just get this wrong, where we focus on the 50 bullets and we forget about what actually leads to successful performance in the job. So, yeah.
Fanta, any last things to add?
The only thing I think I would add, because Ted and Katrina did such a great job, is that from my side, my experience, I've seen a lot of new immigrants who've come to either the US or Canada, and they have skills that are very transferable in the roles, but for whatever reason, employers are hesitant to hire them because they don't have North American experience. And for me, a skill is a skill is a skill. And so understanding that and being open to receiving those candidates, for me, I think that's it's a win for the employer.
Love that you touched on that, because it's like, can you do the work? If you want to remove bias, explain it that clearly. Can you do this? Do you want to do this? Great, we have a winner. Move on.
Right, a lot of people, chats coming in. Yes, ethnicity bias is a real thing. Nodding their head, yes. So it seems to be something that other people are facing as well. So Ted, I'm going to come back to you for a second in this next question here. Do you think there is a difference in fairness in hiring and hiring for an inclusive culture? So do you just need to make your selection process fair? You know, how are we able to do that with everything going on with procedures and guidelines?
Yeah, a really good question, because I do think that, HR folks in particular, when they're designing selection processes and putting in place selection systems, get pushed and pulled in a lot of different directions, where the company, like I think we saw in the slides, Megan, the company might really care about inclusion and diversity, and they communicate that to HR, but then there's not a real understanding of what that means from a selection perspective. And what oftentimes when I talk with folks that are putting in place a selection program, what oftentimes it comes back to is understanding adverse impact. So not selecting a disproportional number of people from some group over another group, or some protected class over another protected class. And that's important, right? Like, you cannot, have adverse impact against any group. And so you can have a fair hiring process, but if you're not focusing on what you're measuring to get to that inclusive culture that you're aspirationally trying to get to, then you're just going to have a fair hiring process that builds upon the existing culture that you already have that isn't good enough, right? And so if you really want to, build a workplace that has the inclusion that we all would hope for, you have to change the criterion that you're measuring in your selection process. You can't just measure the same old things, doing it without impacting a group, and expect to get a more inclusive culture. You have to rethink the job performance domain. You have to measure those traits, those competencies that matter in the culture that you're aspirationally driving towards. So to me, fairness and inclusion are completely different topics. Adverse impact is important. It's the tickets to the ball game, but you can't get in and actually, achieve your goals unless you change the way that you think about what you're measuring in the hiring process. So,
yeah, as you were explaining that, and this is probably going to come off a little snarky, and I don't mean it that way, but I heard someone on a show earlier this week say, fair is the amount that I pay to get on the bus. It doesn't exist. And I don't like to talk about DEI in the context of fair, because I don't actually think any of us have context to even say what fair is. because we live in a racist society that was built on many awful situations that obviously we didn't live through, but we exist in the privilege of. We exist as a concept, right? Our lives are outcomes of some of that. And so I'm not a DEI expert. This is not my specialty. So please, someone interrupt me or speak up if I'm speaking offhand. But the way that I like to think about it is I want to talk to companies about who you want to be. Who do you want to become? Because in most cases, we know we're not there. And if we go hyper tactical, right, to be like skill-oriented assessments will get us to a diverse pipeline that changes our mix, we're not changing anything. We're not changing the experience for them. And it matters more to me that people can be happy at my company, not that I look around and I have some numbers on the wall that say, I did it right, you know? So I feel like, and I'm going to shut up now, I just feel like we have to start to pivot ourselves to a place of who do we want to become? And hiring should be a reflection of who we want to become. This is not a conversation about the best person for the job or any of that.
Yeah, and I would add, I mean, I like the quote about, the bus fare and nice play on words. I think that there is a practical reality that a lot of HR and talent acquisition face, though, in that there is a legal definition of what is fair, and it's not good enough. Like it does not get us to where we need to go. It just checks the box about the proportion of group members that you're hiring. And while you might check the box on this legal compliance consideration, you're not actually accomplishing what you set out to accomplish if you care about these topics. Yeah.
Yeah, great point, Ted, about checking the box too, right? That's the title of the webinar.
Oh, yeah.
Beyond the box, right?
Yeah, just full circle.
But that's how you brought it around. Thank you. But there's this perception at times that that's what it is, right? Okay, great. Nope. Hired woman now. Great, fantastic. Oh, look, we can have a new picture of our diverse board, and we can throw that up on the website. And that's it. We've checked it. It's time to move on. And we need to think about diversity as a continuum. And it is not a one-time decision, one-time change. Even your employer brand is a constant reinvention. And Katrina, the question is, what kind of company do you want to become? I'm hoping that answer is not a single answer and it just changes and that's it for the next 5-10 years. That should be something you're asking yourself all the time. Another thing that we're adding here, we're talking about here is this idea of fit. And it was actually on an earlier conversation that we had, there was this great comment about not thinking of a cultural fit but cultural add. And if you keep hiring people that look like you, think like you, talk like you, you're going to end up having a sea of sameness. And that is unconscious to a lot of things. You just, okay, this person, I think that they can do this job. Instead, it's that continual addition, and hopefully those cultural adds will help answer that question of where you would like to go as a company, and hope build to that answer, at least temporarily, until you ask yourself again.
I mean, there's
diversity.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I was just saying, diversity attracts diversity. And if you are an organization who is serious about diversity, I think one of the things that you should look at is not just your leadership team, but the recruitment team. If I'm a candidate and I'm coming into your organization and I don't see anyone who looks like me, or I don't see anyone everybody looks the same, I'm getting a representation of your organization, and that's the front line. The recruiters are the first people that you meet when you're going into an organization. So your recruitment team should also be a reflection of the population that you're trying to recruit. Yeah,
and I was just going to say, I mean, all of these conversations and all of the things that we're thinking about are all actually supported by really well-documented science and research. And, the topics that we're talking about remind me of a organizational theory from the 1980s called the attraction, selection, attrition hypothesis. And it talked about how organizations over time trend towards homogeneity through this process of attracting people who are like us, selecting the people that are like us, and then the people that attrit out or leave the organization, or the people that make it through that aren't like us, right? And so what does that mean? If your senior leadership is all comprised to looks a certain way, thinks a certain way, acts, believes, talks a certain way, over time, that organization, despite your best interests, are going to trend towards that look and mentality, right? And so it's so important that we intervene at the senior-most levels and get buy-in there, so that we're talking differently at every level in the organization, so that as we evolve, we're evolving towards this more diverse, inclusive culture. Because if we don't intervene there, we'll just trend towards back to where we were, so to speak. So yeah, it made me think of that. Your comments, Fanta.
Great addition, Ted. So we're going to go back to Fanta for a minute here. So, obviously there's a lot to be done in terms of a full brand audit, and how do you figure out where you can find improvements? Do you have any tips for at least kind of scratching the surface to talk about where do you start when reevaluating your brand?
For me, a good place to start is understanding exactly where your organization is in terms of diversity. Like, what does the employee population look like? What does the leadership team look like? Again, what does your recruitment team look like? And that's a good baseline. Where do I need to adjust my efforts? And then looking at the actual pipeline of candidates. Am I getting enough diverse candidates into the pipeline? If I am, are they dropping off? Are they turning down the opportunity, even though, the what we have to offer is good? What is it that is making these candidates turn down the offer or not apply to the job? So those are things that they can look at, and expanding their the recruitment initiatives in order for them to have a wider net, and looking at different places. If you're always recruiting in the same places, you're going to always get the same kind of people. So you need to expand where it is that you're looking. Are there organizations that you can partner with? Are there websites that you're not looking at? One of the things we do is use our diversity network in order for us to touch to different organizations, so that we are able to attract those kind of candidates. And another thing to look at is also the EVP. Is the messaging on your website and in your job descriptions inclusive? Is it welcoming? Does it make me feel like I want to apply to a job? Do I want to work for your company? Do I see myself represented in that organization? My team, the team that I work with every day, we're an extremely diverse team, and I'm very proud to work with the team that I work with every day. And we don't look at diversity in the same way as other people, because it's not something that we consciously think about, because that's just our environment. That's who we are. We're with each other all day long, working together all the time. And that's where you want to get to. You want to get to a place where you're not having to think about it all the time. It just naturally happens, and everyone feels included, and everyone feels like their voice is heard. So you need to start there in order for you to get to that endpoint, I feel.
Perfect. Katrina, I've seen you nodding along with this, and I know that, unbiased recruitment writing is really, your specialty in terms of how you partner with people and help them with this. So maybe you can chime in a little.
No, absolutely. And I love what you said about those voices. I want to touch on the part about like, this is our life, right? I love that you said that, because when you're looking at the team who's writing this content, who's creating these stories, right? It should be their life. If that's the vision of this company, right? You need people who are living the truth, even if it's a microcosm instead of a bigger mess. And that's truth. That's the reality of many organizations. And as a Monster alumni, I know that Monster is so unique, right? Because from regions to different countries to, you represent such a broad variety of humans that it's a unique challenge. If you did not live your life that way, it would be really hard to create something that represents all those spirits. And so I think the only thing that I would add to all of the brilliant things you just said is, I think it's about those voices too, right? And my team, we spend a lot of time sitting with employees, digging into those stories. And often that's my opportunity to hear how it feels to have someone tell me the show versus the tell. Because where EV doesn't land for me, where EVPs sometimes don't land for me, is they feel like an inspirational poster. And you all know what I'm talking about, right? The pond with the rock, or the stacked rocks on the side that says perspective, motivation, right? That's not real. I don't like that. It doesn't feel human to me. And so it's like, if you don't have the voices so you can show versus tell, you're probably going to miss the bar as far as actually representing people.
Great points. All right, we have about 20 minutes left in the webinar. We have a lot of attendee questions that are coming in, so let's pivot over to answering some of these. This one's specific to Fanta. Just a question, you'd mentioned the diversity network. Are you able to talk a little bit more about that? I'm also happy to chime in too.
Yeah, so Meg, fill in wherever I miss, but so we have a network of websites that we partnered with that target people from the people of color, target the LGBTQ community, veterans. So we have a network that we can push your jobs out to or target specific candidates and help drive diversity to your pages.
Great, no additions needed. That's fantastic. Great, a few more that are coming in here. Sorry, I'm scrolling. This one I'm going to kind of open up to anybody. Different industries embrace diversity differently. I had a great conversation with somebody that worked in trucking and logistics. And, at one point in time, she told me that her quotas, her levels of diversity is going to be very different than another company because just the number of female truckers out there, there's just not as many to choose from. So to say that they're going to reach some, so I think that's a good point in saying have goals. Remember, we talked a little bit about goal setting earlier, especially with the leadership, doing quarterly check-ins. Be realistic about what you're doing. This person, though, works in the construction industry, and they want to start the conversation about recruiting more for diversity and embracing more diversity. How do you suggest going about talking about it with those who might be traditionally closed off? So it sounds like this person's still kind of in the beginning stages. As I mentioned, there's a lot of great stats out there, but how do you open that door to that conversation?
Yeah, I saw that question. I thought it was a good one. Because as you said, Meg, there are some practical constraints. Some labor markets don't have the levels of diversity, or some jobs don't attract, certain groups. So, in that case, there might not be as much that you can do. But that's to me the real nature of the question here is, this company doesn't really believe in the value of embracing diversity, as a scientist, I always lean on this, but you answer those questions with data, right? There's just so much data that has amassed that show us that focusing on what's required for the job, not what the characteristics or the group membership of the person is it leads to organizational success. Like one of the points that I noted in your presentation, Meg, that was interesting to me, you said that I think 86% of employees care about this issue. And then you said that 62% would turn down a job offer because of this issue. That's a high number, but I would think that over time, that's just going to get higher. Like more and more people are going to turn it down. And there's good theoretical rationale here, right? And this is something you can bring back to that construction company. When people look at that organization, when people start to make decisions about whether or not they want to apply, they look to see if their values are aligned with the company. And you can see that if a candidate or an employer doesn't build that affective commitment, that belief that the organization has congruence with their values, they're not going to stay. They're not going to apply. They're not going to perform as well. And so I would talk to the leaders in that company about the real business value in embracing these ideas. Like it's smart business to build an inclusive culture, because you're going to get productivity gains. You're going to get better turnover numbers. Like, I mean, right is right. Like building the inclusive model helps everybody achieve all of their goals. So I that's the way I would answer that question. Look at the data about what predicts job performance, look at what builds job commitment and reduces turnover, because this is what does it. This is the answer.
I was like, if Fanta has something to say, I want her to talk first. I don't mean to put you on the spot. I guess my reaction is I've had that conversation, and it turns into, and I'm going to say something hard here. It turns into, are we just supposed to hire the diverse person? I saw the comment about this is reverse bias towards white people. This is reverse bias towards the people that fit in. And that's one of those questions that it would be really easy to just step aside and say that, okay, no, it's not like that. Here's how I see it. I first bring BLS data. I think BLS is a very incredible source for you to understand how your industry breaks down. That's a baseline that can help you understand what kind of representation should probably exist in your company. That's a real baseline for your industry. So if I'm in construction, Stephanie, I'm going to the construction, getting the segment level data that helps me make this decision. And then I'm able to actually say, here's where we want to go. This is the first pinpoint on our journey towards who we want to become. And see, the next piece, and this touches on the generational bias, Lisa, that you just brought up, because often I think people forget that bias exists beyond our skin color. So one of the slides you have where you talked about how bias impacts trans people at work, how it impacts people with disabilities, how it impacts age, how it impacts, et cetera. And when I've been in the room and having these hard conversations, because clearly I'm not very good at shutting up when we're in the awkward space, I will say to people, you're not special. And what I mean by that is not, you're not special. My mom, she would not like that. But what I mean by that is you could get a disability. You could be diagnosed with Parkinson's at 35 and lose everything. You will get older, right? You will become one of these people. All of us have experienced bias. There's not one definition, right? And that is why we changed this world. It's because bias isn't exclusive. It's because bias impacts every single person, you included. And I want to live in a better world for every single person. And I want to know that I left the door open so that somebody like me, who looks like me, who has a life like me, can push it a little bit more for the person behind them, the person behind them, the person behind them. And every single one of us should care about that, period. Sorry, I get really, this is one of those things. You can't take this lightly.
Katrina, thank you.
100%.
Yep. And we appreciate your passion, and it's because of that passion that it's different than just having a seat at the table. It's having a voice at that table too. And it's your passion and the way that you can talk and convey, people listen. And that's what we're all here to do today, right? Is just listen, learn, and keep talking. We need to keep talking to one another, to others, even if they're not listening right now, they will soon. All right, I have a bit of a controversial question. There is a lot of hype that's going on around diversity. Should people be looking at hiring someone like a chief diversity officer or somebody that's tasked with diversity? Or is it spread over multiple departments, organizations, people?
I don't think it hurts to have someone responsible for that. Okay, so let me start there. I don't think it hurts to have someone who's responsible for that vision within an organization. I do think that it's not a role for one person, however. That is an organizational change. That is something that needs to happen from the top down. So if you just by hire, and I've had customers who, they went out, they hired a new diversity, a chief diversity officer, and that person's responsible for diversity, but then the organization themselves is not behind that person supporting them in change. So hiring the person is nice. It looks good on paper, but the whole organization needs to be able to support change. And the change has to be at every level of the organization. This can't be just some, figurehead that comes in. That's not how this works.
Yeah, and that's the practical reality most of the time, isn't it, Fanta? That I when I talk to client organizations and they have somebody in place, it's like the senior leadership group thinks that was the intervention. Hiring that person was the intervention, and they're done. We got that taken care of. We got a chief diversity officer, and so often, unfortunately, the people in these roles, as well intended and talented as they are, they're not given the budget that they need. They're not given the support that they need. And so it ends up being a group that just looks at adverse impact statistics in the hiring process and like I talked about earlier, and doesn't really do the types of things that they want to do. So I think that hiring a chief diversity officer is a great idea, but you got to go that next step too and support that person, fund that person, build a team around that person so that they can actually be successful in the role.
Exactly. If we're going to call it the war on talent, do y'all send one soldier in? No, we send a whole group on in to try to address this, right? And if you cannot send one soldier, and I think the other piece of this, and I actually, no joke, I was just writing about this. It's weird how it's coming up, is, you have to take care of that person too. A chief diversity officer carries an emotional weight that is enormous. It is significant, especially over the last year, while we have had a series of traumatic events that have changed the direction of this company. And I say this broadly, it's not even just the chief diversity officer that's carrying that, it's every single person inside of your company is carrying this in some way. And you have to know that traditionally, they are highly empathetic people who are carrying additional emotional weight. So I love what you said about support. It has to be so much more than just one person marching on out there like, I'm here to fight the war on talent. Don't do that to them. Please, please.
So because it's not this one person, right? Because it falls on more people, we've received a lot of questions about performance indicators, right? Everybody's looking for KPIs. How can we measure improvement, especially as we talked about earlier, different industries have different considerations for what's success. I can jump in from a Monster perspective. Surveys, we poll our employees all the time. And, maybe it's not a numbers game. Maybe it's just a gut feeling. Like if you get an overwhelming response from your employees that they're feeling supported, that they have a place to go to, that they have a voice that's heard, that is a measure of success, that we are doing the right thing. Anything else?
Yeah, I was just going to say in, then out, right? And what I mean by that is, are people thriving here? Are our diverse people actually succeeding? Do we see promotion paths for them? Are they getting promoted at the same rate? Is our pay equity right? Are things happening inside of this company that are meeting our metric, our baseline, which means people are paid equally, treated equally, and on the same paths, right? If that, let's say that's your baseline, you have to look inside, then you can start to build pipelines. Because if you start building pipelines, recruiting, creating all of these partnerships, that's what I call acceleration to failure. In a more crude way, it's like putting poop in a rocket, right? You are just making shit fly faster, and it's not going to create the outcome you want. It's going to cause higher turnover. And frankly, a lot of people out there telling the world that your company isn't good enough and that it's not keeping up. And if you're nervous about that truth, fix the truth first and then go out and try to get more diverse people.
Yeah. And practically it's difficult. We're talking about measuring things that are difficult to measure, right? And oftentimes we're intervening at the individual level and expecting that to generalize to the team, department, or organization level, right? And so there's a ton of measurement challenges in here too. So I think you have to allow these programs, and this is where getting buy-in can be tough. You got to let them run for a while. You've got to let the impact, let them run so you can see the impact over time. So like we talked about earlier, if you change what you're measuring in the selection process, you're bringing people into a culture that they didn't necessarily, that the incumbents didn't get measured on those things when they join. So it takes time as you fill in more people and those ideas become infectious and the culture starts to spread. It might, the reality is you're going to have to look 2 years from now and 3 years from now to see where it's happening. This is not a problem that, we solve overnight with a HR policy. It's long-term commitment. So it's hard to find those KPIs.
Yeah. And one of the things we look at when we're building EVPs for customers is, like Meg said, surveys, but we also look at interviews or surveys that are done right after onboarding and information that we get from exit interviews. Why did people leave? What is it that made them want to go? And if someone is not feeling comfortable or welcome or included, if they feel like their voice isn't being heard, those are all key indicators. They may not be things that you necessarily would be looking for, but those are very good things to look at as well.
And I would say too, as far as KPIs, also look at your metrics by team. Because like Fanta said, right, her team is very diverse, but maybe the customer service team is a problem area or an area where we're not, or sales. Our sales team is a pipeline issue. I work with a lot of companies that they've been able to take the high level DEI data and just go one layer below that to segment it. And it gives you a map of opportunities instead of trying to create a one size fits all approach, because we're all here trying to make our company stand out and create a special experience. We can't all do that the exact same way. So your KPIs are different for every single company. And I think they should probably exist at the macro level and then the micro level of the teams.
So we are closing in on the hour. I just want to thank everyone for being such active participants today. I'm going to open up to the panel one last time to see if there's any closing thoughts. No pressure.
Well, we're all so quiet. I would quickly address two questions I saw come in about online assessments, because that's what I do. And so I'd feel remiss if I didn't address it. And the question was around whether or not online assessments are biased. And if you use a well-developed solution assessment and you deploy it in the right way, they're the least biased part of your hiring process. An algorithm, not an AI algorithm that's inputting data from all over the place, but the scoring in an online assessment has no idea what group membership a person has. It's scoring based on that person's experiences that they've reported, they've engaged in over time, and providing something that's just based on job-related data. So a well-developed online assessment is perhaps one of the primary ways to combat bias in the hiring process. So I just wanted to touch on that quickly. And then the last thing I wanted to say is I saw a couple of comments about Katrina for president. I'd support that. So it was a good comment. So well done, audience. I think you've come up with an innovative and good suggestion there.
I mean, I have no political aspirations, just to be clear, but I do think I would tell, I guess, this is kind of like an emotional thought, like you guys were expecting anything else from me by now, but I just want you to be bold. I want you to be brave. What we're talking about, you said it's not a checkbox. That means it's going to be hard. And every time you do the hard thing, every time you say the hard thing, every time you step up, I hope you know you are creating that little ripple, right? We're cracking the door, and that matters. It's for someone, and it's so much bigger than that one bad day for us. And so I just ask everybody here to listen to what we said, to consider all of these ideas, and to be bold in that.
I think I agree that Katrina should run for president. And what I would say is, I would hope that everyone, even if you're not as passionate about the subject, that you find some value in what we said, and that what you take home from it is that it's not something that can be done overnight. It's a process. It's little steps. And if you start with baby steps and make small changes, those small changes will grow, and eventually you'll get to a place where you want to be. So For me, I think that's the most important thing is as knowing that, it's a team effort and baby steps will get you there.
And we'll get you one of those nice motivational posters too.
Hang in there, Kitty. All right. Well, thank you.
For today's webinar.
So thank you everyone for being again such an engaged audience. Thank you as always to our incredible expert of panel. We love you all. Thank you for joining us again. This has been such a great conversation. Seen a lot of great comments about people taking so much away from this. So thank you for your time, for your insights, for your passion. Truly appreciate it. Tomorrow we'll be sending out a copy of the deck. I'll include some sources. There are some requests for stats, as well as a recording of this. Please watch it again, share, have fun. And as always, reach out to any of us if you have any questions. Thank you so much. Have a great day.